Welcome to the Evolving Minds podcast by Pink Elephant. Insightful conversations with the entrepreneurs, executives, and changemakers shaping the future of psychedelic therapy and progressive mental health. Meet the minds, changing the business of healing.
Welcome to the Evolving Minds podcast. I'm Jason Najum, editor and journalist in the psychedelic medicine industry. Today's guest is Ronan Levy, founder of Field Trip Health. When looking for insights into paradigm-shifting industries, few people have as much hands-on experience. Ronan was at the forefront of the cannabis boom, founding one of Canada's largest medical cannabis clinics. He then entered the psychedelics industry before there was much of a psychedelics industry to speak of. Field Trip was part of the first wave of companies to go public and establish psychedelics as a legitimate investment opportunity. Over the next few years, Field Trip raised over $100 million, listed on the NASDAQ, and expanded across the globe. Eventually, as with so many other booms, commercial realities began to hit. Today, Field Trip is no longer in operation. So what can we learn from these experiences? What does the future hold for psychedelic medicine companies? Stay tuned. Ronan Levy shares his insights. All right, we're here with Ronan Levy, founder and former CEO of Field Trip Health, and an impressive portfolio of other entrepreneurial endeavors. Ronan, nice to speak with you again.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Definitely my pleasure. Why don't we start with a brief introduction about your history and how you think about your work?
How far back do you want me to go? I don't even remember much of my childhood, so I can't even go back that far.
We can go there.
I mean, I think it is somewhat relevant because I think I've been for lack of a better term, a shit disturber for much of my life. I could always get away with things that other people would get caught on. And I always chose to, when I was in grade 6, I think it was grade 6 or grade 7, everyone had to do a presentation about what they wanted to be when they grow up. And everyone wanted to be like a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher. Somewhere in my mind, I got the idea that I should tell everybody that I want to be a mob boss when I grow up. So for my presentation, I acted as a mob boss. That's just kind of been my life. But from a professional perspective, I'm a lawyer, still a qualified lawyer, did corporate law for a few years, hated my life. I like to say I used to be a lawyer, but I feel much better now. And then slowly but surely just got into more and more interesting industries. So I started in corporate law, went to pharmaceuticals, got into media law, worked with MTV Canada, where I started learning about the digital world quite a bit. Ended up becoming the general counsel of an online dating company, which was very interesting, and then decided to become an entrepreneur. I had plans to work with a friend who had a software development shop to develop some sort of app, because it was like 2010 when it was app mania and everyone was raising tons of money for apps and all that kind of stuff. So we started working together, and I learned an important lesson that when it comes to, partnership, when someone has the opportunity to get paid cash or take equity in another business, they will always prioritize the cash. And so our attempt to build something never got off the ground. And I was kind of stuck. I didn't have a job. My savings were depleting. And then a friend said he had a friend who had opened a cash for gold business in Vancouver. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, and he wants to expand to Toronto and it's doing really well. Do you have any interest? And I'm like, absolutely not. But as time progressed and I had very few other options, and it just so happened at the time, my mom had left her job and, she was in her mid 60s and not very hireable. So I'm like, you know what? Even though I have zero interest in cash for gold, if I could start this business, learn a little bit, make a little bit of money and give my mom a job, until she's ready to retire, that'd be a pretty cool win. So I decided, despite my better interest, to open up a cash for gold store called Toronto Gold. And the business wasn't terribly successful, but it did do two things. One is it opened my eyes to the fact that there are a lot of industries that have a terrible reputation, that if you bring a little bit of honesty and authenticity to it, you can really make a really interesting business and do good for the world. Shine a light on a moldy area and you can clean up that mold. And that's kind of what we did with that business. We really focused on trying to do it the way no one expects, but being honest and transparent and gold buying. Again, not something most people are interested in, but it was a good lesson. That business never really paid my bills though. And so I kept doing freelance legal work. And through that, I happened to meet a couple of guys who would eventually become my business partners in the cannabis industry and the psychedelics industry, who were trying to do some startups. Because I was an entrepreneur and a lawyer at the same time, I not only provided them with legal advice, I provided them with business advice. So one day we're going down the list of all of their ideas, and all of them I thought were pretty terrible. And just as I was leaving, and I can go back into my emails and still find the email, they're like, well, there's this one thing. It was late December back in 2013. And then I said, there's one other idea, the laws around medical marijuana in Canada are changing. And so there's an opportunity to create a marketplace for medical marijuana. And I remember stopping, putting on my coat and took it off. And I'm like, why are you guys not doing that one? And I'm like, wow, it's marijuana. It seems so scuzzy. Our wives don't like it. I'm like, guys, like I've gone from corporate law to pharmaceutical law to like online dating and now cash for gold. Like if I get into the cannabis industry and it's legal, this is a step up reputationally for me. So if you guys aren't going to do it, I'm going to do it. And slowly but surely I cajoled them into that. We ended up opening the largest network of cannabis clinics in Canada, sold that to Aurora, really instrumental. It's estimated that like 1 in every 2 family doctors in Ontario had referred a patient to one of our clinics. Like we probably moved more weed in this world than most large drug lords at the end of the day, as a way to think about it, but in a legal and a healthier way, I would say. We left cannabis in 2018-ish, and it just so happened that a random errant conversation that my business partner Joseph had with a woman named Judy Bloomstock opened us up to the fact that psychedelics were starting to be a thing. And I'm like, psilocybin is a thing? And Joseph, my partner, was like, I don't know. So we brought Judy back. And it was right around the time that Michael Pollan had published How to Change Your Mind. MAPS had just been granted breakthrough therapy designation for their phase 2. And probably the most important thing, at least for my mental model, was there's about 4 or 5 online stores openly selling mushrooms in Canada.
Yep.
And I was like, holy crap. Like not dark web, just World Wide Web. Everyone can go click on and buy. And at that moment, I realized that the global zeitgeist around psychedelics had changed. Most people just hadn't caught up to that realization. So I realized there was a huge opportunity to get out ahead. And in much the same way, I think the rise of the cannabis industry has done a lot of good. It's not harm-free, but I think it's a very, very net positive on society. I realized that if we could do that for psychedelics, the net positive on society would be even larger for a number of reasons. And so we got together, again, having to cajole my business partners to convince them there was an opportunity here. It took about 6 months, but in April 2019, we started Field Trip and had a good few years at Field Trip before the bottom fell out.
Yeah. That's a great arc and evolution. It seems that history led you to where you were supposed to get.
Yep.
And I guess we'll be focusing a lot on Field Trip. I guess Field Trip was part of that first wave of companies to lead this psychedelic renaissance. And
yep.
Along with MindMed and Compass and Atai, you were part of that first batch to really put psychedelic medicine on the radar in terms of legitimacy, and getting all of a sudden 2020 companies are getting listed. Psychedelic medicine companies are getting listed on the stock exchange. They're getting articles in Forbes, and you were part of that. Speak about that experience a little bit. I mean, there was a big wave, and you were part of that original group.
Yeah. I think it's one of the gifts, unlike, retaining follicles, that I was given, is like just having a good sense of like where the world is headed. And so it was tremendous to me. It felt like my calling. Like when we started Field Trip, I was like, this is what I was meant to do. Right. Because what I loved about it, it was shit disturbing in a way, in that we were challenging people's notions of right and wrong, good versus bad, healthy versus unhealthy, which I love to do. The therapeutic evidence was just so compelling. So it wasn't just changing people's minds. We were actually helping people, whether they're coming into a Field Trip clinic or just discovering psilocybin or MDMA or any of the, wonderful medicines that can have a profound impact on their own. Just driving that conversation forward was awesome. And we just knocked it out of the park with Field Trip. And part it was because we were the first kind of really out there a lot, being very vocal. but also because everybody else in the space was going super medical, right? Like it's compass pathways, compassion, a tie. It's like, this didn't mean anything to anybody. But the brand Field Trip, almost everybody in North America has like this positive connotation with a field trip, right? And it was playful and it was irreverent. It wasn't unserious, but we could look at the world and remind people. And when I look out and think about what's driving the mental health crisis that's worldwide, it's because we've lost a sense of connection to the mystery, and we've sure gotten way too fucking serious in our lives. We're so uptight. I mean, Jonathan Haidt, who's really popular these days with the books like the Coddling of the American Public and The Anxious Generation. It's like, we've forgotten that we live in the safest, wealthiest world that has ever existed, yet we spend so much time worrying about shit that doesn't matter. And so having a fun, irreverent brand to kind of poke people into like rediscover mystery, rediscover fun, stop taking things just so seriously, and open up yourself to the possibilities that, maybe not is everything as it seems, really spoke to people, and I think a lot of people, both in the psychedelic space and kind of, interested in the space, really wanted that brand. And so I think that's why our brand just caught fire. And that's why I was the first person on MSNBC talking about psychedelics, and we were all over the place. Not to take any credit away from our PR partners at KCSA and Lewis Goldberg, who did tremendous work for us there. But we just hit on a thread that people really needed and wanted at that time.
Yeah, I definitely remember your brand when I was discovering the space in 2019 and 20. I do remember your brand popping out from the other slightly more serious drug development companies. So yeah, it did work.
Yeah.
It did work brand wise, and you're touching on an interesting tension there that you probably experienced. Introducing something like psychedelics, bringing it into the mainstream, into legitimacy. How much of your job, I'm assuming at the beginning, was not trying to convince people that it wasn't just psychedelics, it wasn't just drugs, that there was legitimate science behind. So you're trying to like tiptoe this line of branding. But yeah, you got to come with the legitimate facts. You got to convince people that this is more than just a drug play. There was a tension there, and then you're uplisting to the NASDAQ. I mean, the tension between the reality of psychedelics, the branding of lightness that you wanted, but the serious world that you're entering. I mean, there's all kinds of tensions there.
Yeah, there were, but it was very easy. Just like in the cannabis space, the evidence speaks for itself, right? Like you just have to tell people, be like, listen, you don't have to believe me. You can read all of these studies in Nature and coming out of Johns Hopkins and Imperial College. Like I'm just a mouthpiece for all the scientific work that's happening that is just so damn compelling, right? And so bringing that passion to it, and speaking to it in a way that people, could get excited by. It wasn't just appealing to their logic, but like speaking to their emotions, and at the end of the day, where it gets fun and interesting, and I think where I got to add my voice to the conversation, is that the science speaks for itself. The why, well, we don't really know. I mean, we can talk about the biomechanistic considerations, but when you got into like the conversations of like what's really happening here, and I consistently heard it from so many of our patients and truthfully reporters who had come through. We had a reporter, I think from Popular Mechanics, come in and did an interview with her afterwards, and she was talking about how when she came out of her ketamine experience, because she came to Field Trip to do ketamine, she spent like 10 minutes just like looking at her hand and marveling. And I'm like, yeah, it's like rediscovering wonder is probably the single most effective thing to get over depression, right? Like once you connect to that mystery, to the wonder of the world and just how cool it is to be alive right now, because objectively it's so easy to like get yourself lost in the weed and become nihilistic around it. But like when you reconnect to the wonder of it all, it's like, wow. And I think just so many people wanted to hear that like, oh yeah, right. It's okay to be playful. It's okay to be curious. It's okay to be in wonder. And if psychedelics are that stepping stone, and I've got all the research behind me to tell me they're safe and effective, it's like it just gave people a lot of permission that I think they were looking for to start exploring things that, in our modern Western society, I'm not necessarily an advocate of organized religion, but I do think we've lost something in terms of connection to spirit and wonder that religion kind of had held. And as we, universally across the board in North America, kicked religion out of our lives, we lost that and nothing replaced it. And then psychedelics came in and kind of gave people a path back to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I experienced that myself. Psychedelics and psychedelic medicine and this movement, it's like a multi-layered kind of like permission structure, because you get all of these more abstract, subjective, positive things to your life, but yet there's science behind it. But yet we know it can help people, actually can save people's lives in the real world. So you have the personal and the spiritual, then you have the, the medicinal benefits. And then there's a commercial potential here. So all of those things came together, I think, to create that boom where it's something new, it's something that touches people, but yet, let's be honest, the commercial opportunity was there. 2021 to 2022, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars were invested in this space. You raised hundreds of millions of dollars. So, maybe speak about what it was like to, you stepped into the big leagues, listed on the NASDAQ. Maybe talk a little bit about that experience of taking that next biggest step.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the single most transcendent moments of my life when we went down to New York and we saw the Field Trip logo, hanging over Times Square. And, it's one thing to start a company and take it public on the NASDAQ. It's another thing to do it in something that, literally 5 years ago would be incomprehensible to everybody on the planet. Doing it with a psychedelic company, it's like, it was amazing. But it came with a hell of a lot of fear, right? Like the standards that we were now held to, the expectations that were on us. We raised a lot of capital. A lot of people had, put their trust in us, and and this was probably one of the things that was hardest for me, is that because we were I wouldn't say the biggest company, but we were probably the shining light in the industry. More people know Field Trip to this day than know Atai or Compass Pathways, even though Field Trip hasn't existed in 2 years. We're carrying a lot of the burden of the entire movement. Certainly MAPS and Lycos was at the forefront with their clinical trials, but in terms of awareness, that was on our shoulders. So our success or failure, I took it upon myself, and didn't turn out to play out that way, but it felt like our success or failure could be the success or failure of the entire industry. And that was wonderful in some respects, gives you such a sense of mission and purpose, but, very anxiety inducing in another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that tension, we'll say that fear, but there's an apprehension. People who are in the space and believed in the medicine, we knew that we were finally entering mainstream acceptance, and any, a commercial glitch, a bad piece of news, someone being irresponsible, a patient going, having a bad experience. I think everybody was acting with care, because we knew that we were about to change things, and everybody in the space on the media side, we were all really careful to be as responsible as possible, because I think everyone felt a bit of guardianship about the movement.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think we were probably too responsible, to be quite honest. It's like the one thing I noticed very early on is how much infighting there was in the industry between, the underground movement, the anti-capitalists, the therapists, and so many people wouldn't even talk to us because we were dared to create a for-profit business in the space, right? We were bad people. And, I remember in Neshe Devanau, I was on a panel with her at some conference, I can't remember. And she basically accused all people who work in for-profit business to be narcissistic. I think she called us narcissistic capitalists or something along those lines. I'm like, whoa, hold the phone on that, right? And it was just like, there's so much of that going on. And truthfully, in some ways we can blame Neshe for the fact that the Lycos clinical trials was not approved by the FDA. And it's like, what are you doing? Like it dumbfounds me that people can't agree that a step in the right direction, even if it's not the perfect step, is still a step in the right direction. And And so I think that seriousness and that protectiveness was actually destructive to a degree. I think it was necessary because, all the war on drugs, winners don't do drugs, this is your brain on drugs. Like, it was pretty baked into society. So I get the necessity to like be responsible, but to me, it almost felt like it was taken too far.
Yeah. Well, we were in a moment culturally and societally where the dials were turned up on a lot of issues. I think that was in the zeitgeist as well. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts and the arc of Field Trip. So Field Trip was, from that opening batch of companies, the one that was focused on a clinical therapeutic model. Most of the other contemporaries were drug development. Is that the big differentiation?
Yeah. I mean, at the very get-go of Field Trip, we kind of looked out and we had a very real sense that legal psychedelics in some form or another was happening, and having come from the cannabis industry where that didn't come through legislation, it came through, state-based initiatives and or in Canada, constitutional challenges. Kind of had a sense that may happen with psychedelics. And shortly after we started Field Trip, Denver decriminalized psychedelics and all that kind of stuff. And so without legal access to psychedelics, like there had been in cannabis, when we got into cannabis, we're like, okay, what do we do? Like, how do we build a business when everything is still illegal? And so we saw kind of three avenues. The first one was expectations that psilocybin would follow the trajectory of cannabis, where it'd be regulated to be grown and sold through dispensaries. And having come from the cannabis industry, we knew that going from an underground cannabis grow up to large scale production is not as easy as just building a bigger box. You actually have to get sophisticated in cultivation. And so we set up a lab at the University of West Indies in Jamaica, just doing psilocybin cultivation, seeing what we could do to get a handle on larger scale cultivation and developing new strains and understanding their chemical profiles that lead to experiences, much like terpenes in the cannabis industry lead to different effects, when paired with cannabis or paired with THC or CBD. We also realized, and this is something we learned from Michael Pollan as well as Rick Doblin, was that there was going to be a massive need for the clinical infrastructure to deliver this care, because everyone talks about set and setting, and most doctors' offices are not equipped to deliver this kind of care because they're very sterile, very fluorescent light. Like, if you want to tee someone up to have a traumatic psychedelic experience, doctor's office are pretty much exactly set up to do that. So we started building the clinical infrastructure, which is what we got known for the most. And then we also started advancing drug development work, again, because we didn't know what this industry was going to look like. We're like, all right, well, let's make a small bet on cultivation. Let's make a small bet on clinics, and let's make a small bet on drug development. And so we moved forward with all of those. But the clinical infrastructure is what we got known for.
Right. And that was kind of driving revenue in the early days, keeping the lights on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what got us attention and got us, investor interest early on. But truthfully, most of our capital that was invested into the company was interested in the drug development side of things. Mm-hmm. So did it keep the lights on? In a way, it drove revenue, but the clinics also were the biggest cash burn in our business as well. They were very expensive to operate, and ultimately, we could never get them sustainably and profitably operating.
Yeah, let's dig into that. I guess the aspiration was to set one. Other companies were doing the same thing. Get set up offering ketamine therapy, since that was the only one that was legally accessible. Set up your infrastructure as a ketamine therapy provider, and hopefully have legislative changes so other compounds would eventually come down the pipeline, like MDMA and psilocybin. I'm guessing that was the vision for the clinic model.
Exactly.
And what got in the way of, it's not just Field Trip. A lot of clinic companies scaled up and aren't around anymore. Probably, with the same vision as Field Trip had. What got in the way, do you think? Was it not enough adoption, not enough people coming in for ketamine therapy, slow legislative movement?
Yeah, it was a confluence of things. I mean, throw a pandemic in there, and that makes things a lot more challenging because we
Right.
opened our first clinic in Toronto 5 days before the world shut down in March 2020. So that was a barrier. What we realized is that trying to scale the delivery of psychedelic therapies between the doctors and the therapists in the space, it was a very operationally challenging, to do it. And we held ourselves to the highest standards. So when we initially set up, you got paired with you would do an intake, you'd be paired with a therapist. They would do an assessment. If they felt like you were a good candidate, there'd be the medical consideration. And if the medical consideration got passed, then you would be paired back with that therapist, and that therapist would sit with you through the entirety of your journey. And because ketamine, the therapeutic effect is achieved after 3 to 5 experiences, not closer to the single you'll get with psilocybin or MDMA, that therapist would sit with you for those 5. And it's really hard to schedule a therapist, for 5 sessions with the same person without having to reschedule and move. And if your schedule changed. And so there's just operational challenges to do so. And it got really expensive. And then, so a course of treatment was around $5,000 USD. And then we hit the commercial consideration, which was, and I'm just making up the numbers for sake of argument. But what we realized is that 50% of the population already does psychedelics. They don't need a doctor and a therapist to take them on a journey. They have whatever infrastructure they need already to do it. So they don't need our clinics, and they certainly don't need to pay the premium to have a professional experience. And then half the population will never touch psychedelics because whatever they were taught in high school or elsewhere, makes them uncomfortable with the concept of losing control or trying any of these drugs. And so what we ended up with, there's a very narrow margin of people who were interested in psychedelics, had a mental health diagnosis that was sufficient to justify using ketamine-assisted therapy for treatment from our doctor's perspective, that didn't have otherwise a contraindication that would knock them out, that had the money still to pay the cost of this, that isn't already going underground for this kind of work. And so there just wasn't that many people in that space. And so, when you think about basic business considerations like customer acquisition, it's like, even if we were running ads online, a person clicked through and signed up, the odds of that person getting through sign up to actually being in a chair ended up being like, 1/10 of 1%. And you just can't run a business where you have big spaces, expensive spaces, full-time therapists and doctor staff and all that kind of stuff waiting to treat these patients. And you got to spend a fortune to try and bring them in. And so we could not make it economically viably work. There are clinics still doing ketamine infusions, which we didn't want to do because we wanted to help hold ourselves to a higher standard and also be prepared for MDMA assisted therapy or psilocybin assisted therapy. And doing ketamine infusions and having clinical infrastructure for that does not translate very easily into doing assisted therapy, psychedelic assisted therapy. So that was not a model we could go after. And then, of course, insurance, has its head so far up its ass. The world looks like a colon to it that, they would just never get on board to actually make the cost of it reasonable. Which is, it's literally mind blowing to me that more employers weren't on board, because based on not the most robust studies, but decent enough studies, our ketamine assisted therapy was single-handedly the most effective depression treatment available anywhere, period, in terms of our results. Like, on average, we saw our patients go from severe depression and anxiety to mild or non-existent depression and anxiety. And those benefits would last for up to 6 months, we measured out to. That was the average patient experience. And in terms of productivity and decreased healthcare costs when people aren't in a depressed state, the savings to every employer anywhere would have been massive, right? So everybody should have gotten on board with this, because just a purely economic perspective, the cost of treatment would have been more than offset by the increased productivity, less days off, and lower healthcare costs delivered to that person.
Yeah.
No one did it. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. I guess you could say that public adoption, telling that story that I mentioned before, it's not enough to tell people that it works. Like, the widespread public adoption is happening, It's getting more accepted, but I mean, you lived it. There wasn't your sliver of market was hurt by not enough people going to that option. And I wonder, in retrospect, would Field Trip do something different? I mean, probably, obviously, everyone would do something different. Probably in retrospect, telemedicine, a little bit. A slimmed down operational model, the clinics being a little bit, what in retrospect, what would he do differently? Companies like Mind Bloom and other ketamine delivery, home delivery. I mean, there's options now, with foresight. What would you see?
I would have gone into a model, what I'd call just like modern mental health, which is like we would do med management. There's so many people who just need a psychiatrist, and support with traditional antidepressants, and you just bring them into your ecosystem and you build a business. There's enough psychiatric clinics that can do well. And so you start making money the old fashioned way, the way that people understand. And then you add on services like ketamine assisted therapy. So for those people who are like, you know what, I don't like the side effects of the SSRIs, or they're not working, or I want to try something different, or I heard about psychedelics and I'd like to try it. It's like, okay, cool. It's like we've built a business that's sustainable on a traditional model. And now we can start to expand and slowly move people as they get educated into the alternative treatments over to these, much more effective, episodic as opposed to chronic treatments. That's what I would have done differently.
Yeah, that would get more people in the door, because you weren't leading with the taboo compounds.
Yeah.
You're leading with something more traditional. Ease them into it.
People. Exactly. Yeah. And listen, you see that happening a bit now, like Stella, which bought some of the assets of Field Trip after a restructuring. It's kind of their business model a little bit. They bought some clinics off of Numinous that was doing the same thing. And so like that's where I would have been. And leveraging the Field Trip brand to just like appeal to a wider audience of like, hey, this is modern mental health. You can stick with your meds, but if you want to try something new, we got you covered at, everywhere you want to be. I think that could have been very, very effective, but we grew too big too quickly that trying to pivot our business model, it was just really challenging.
Yeah. All of that sounds exactly right. Let's stay for a moment on the cliched grew too big too quickly. That's what happened?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, one of the things that happened was, so we opened our first clinic in March 2020, and we'd always anticipated trying to do a financing around September 2020. Of course, there was that pandemic in the way. And so what happened is April 2020, markets are off 40%. And if you're a startup business, you're like, how the hell am I going to raise capital when everybody, in the public markets has lost their shirts? But there are two small Canadian public companies, Champignon Brands, and I think it was MindMed, who were still public. And even though the broader markets were off 30-40%, we're up 200%. And so all the Canadian investment banks started calling us and saying like, hey, you guys want to do a financing? You guys want to do a financing? And we looked out and like, I don't know if there's going to be a capital markets industry come September. So we're going to try and take while the taking's good. So we agreed to do a financing. But that came with the conditions of having to go public on a Canadian exchange. And so even though that was not our preferred course, we took it, not seeing many other options. And so once we had sort of built the business model to justify a go public, to justify the valuation, to make it make sense to go public, it's like, okay, we knew the speed at which we had to scale, and we thought we could achieve it. It wasn't that we thought it was an unrealistic model, but it just hadn't been proven, right? So as soon as we raised that capital, we got into trying to scale those clinics, and we did. But like I said, the customer acquisition, the client acquisition just didn't happen as fast as we expected, and the cost of operations were much higher. But we tried to live up to the kind of growth plans that people had invested in us on. And so, yeah, we grew big. And then by the time we realized that we couldn't make the model work, we had 12 clinics operating. We had well over 100 employees. and we had a whole bunch of professionals who had a viewpoint on how things should and should not be done. And so you couldn't just be like, okay, tomorrow, we couldn't be like Elon Musk, be like, tomorrow we're switching and this is the new thing. It would have created a revolt. So it took a lot of time to get buy-in to trying to change the standards and let people in more easily and, change the care structure. And so, yeah, too big, too fast. And, truthfully, with a set of employees that, rightfully had very strong opinions on how things should be done, but it's hard to build consensus when that's the case.
Right. So the blessing of capital infusion, of people jumping on board, it's a blessing and a curse, and it, it led to different decisions, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do future companies navigate this sudden success and sudden opportunity? How do you say no to $100 million raise?
Yeah, I mean, I still kind of ascribe to the theory from Vic Neufeld, who was the CEO of a company called Afria, who said, rain or snow, take the dough. When the money's there, you take it, because you don't know, like, the windows for raising capital open and close, and you don't know when that's going to happen. So when it's open, you just got to be really disciplined. You got to be really, really disciplined when you raise a lot of capital. And again, I'm not saying we weren't disciplined, but we had a model that we were trying to live up to, and a story that, investors believed in, that we were trying to prove. And it just never worked as the way we expected it. So, just be smart.
Yeah. I mean, how do you navigate? How do you see the water while you're swimming in it? I mean, we all went through that first psychedelic boom. And, your model seemed right. Smart people were putting money into it. So yeah, how does, lessons to take away, be smart, what's the wisdom besides be smart? Do we have to realize that these, I don't want to call it a bubble. I don't believe I don't believe it's a bubble, but like, taking a step back and having a look at our expectations. How much are they realistic? How much of it is I don't want to call it hype, but how do we step away and realize we're perhaps swimming in a bit of a bubble?
It wasn't even the bubble. It was just basic business, basic principles, which is like, don't expand until you know exactly what you're doing. And unfortunately, we were put in a position where we had to expand before we were everyone talks about entrepreneurship being, building flying while building the plane at the same time. And there's a little bit of that for sure. But when you're creating something so disparate from the status quo, recognize that it's going to take longer for people to get on board. It's going to take longer for the medical community to really buy in. And growing sustainably, it depends on the market. It's hard to generalize, but like, growing sustainably is usually much smarter than growing quickly. Because usually in most industries, there's not a winner take all opportunity. There's usually multiple winners that can operate in spaces, especially when it comes to in-person experiences, where geography is such a huge factor that, just because I have a clinic in Toronto doesn't mean you can't have a clinic in Toronto. And it may be for a long time that having two clinics in Toronto competing actually is net beneficial for both, because you're creating awareness, you're providing evidence, more people are comfortable with it, more people are talking about it, and you get more people into the whole ecosystem that you share than ever would have come in had there only been one. So yeah, those are kind of the big takeaways, is just like, make sure your model's working before you put fuel on the fire.
Sounds like wisdom to me. And what does the next field trip look like? Is it a more digital heavy model? Is it at home? Are there AI therapists? How do you crystal ball the next iteration of field trip out there?
In the psychedelic space?
Yeah. or
Yeah.
psychedelics, innovative mental health.
I'm not a huge believer in the capacity of AI therapists because I feel like a lot of the value in therapy is just being seen and not judged by a person. I think that goes a long way. And as much as an AI can talk you through things, and I think there is some degree of utility from it, I don't think it creates like the real depth of what creates it. Maybe I'm just naively optimistic about what motivates humans, but that's my sense of it. I did not invest in a single other psychedelic company, and I would not invest in a single psychedelic company right now, to be quite honest. I don't see a world in which this scales properly. I think there's opportunity for, regionalized or localized clinics of 2, 3, 4 clinics under, a given ownership brand operating successfully. I don't see the possibility of like a nationwide clinic of psychedelic therapy clinics operating. I think most of society just wants to take a pill and have it done the easy way. And there's a subset of people who like doing the work, but I think that's going to be the exception, not the norm. And so I don't know. I don't think psychedelic scale. I don't think, even if Lykos got their approval from the FDA, I think that all that would have done is like created more and more underground therapists giving MDMA, because all of a sudden the legal stigma around MDMA would be substantially reduced, but most people would still be going underground. So I don't know. I'm not bullish on the psychedelic industry broadly as mass scale, but I am very bullish on psychedelics as being a wonderful tool for spiritual awakening, mental health, happiness, well-being. My wife and we do MDMA once a quarter, and it is like the best thing you can do. I swear to God, if people did that, divorce rates would drop by 75%, because it's just an opportunity to clean up all those little things that kind of build up over time when you're trying to run a household and a family. And once you can clear that and emotionally work through it, it's like you feel reconnected, and your relationship gets way stronger. And it's like, that's wonderful. And I don't need a goddamn doctor. I don't think anybody really needs a doctor or a therapist necessarily to do that. Maybe you want one, but like, again, it's like, it's so easy to come by without scale by and large in most locations. That's like, it's not a scalable business in that sense, but everybody should be doing it. So it's a weird circumstance where everybody, I think not everybody, but a lot of people should be doing it. And I don't see a worldwide business, even though maybe worldwide everybody's doing it.
Right. Yeah, so the drug development wing of the psychedelic movement maybe could fit into this. A lot of them are moving away, learning from the MAPS rejection, moving away from psychedelic assisted therapy as part of the approval process, and just trying to get the medicines approved on their own. So maybe that will remove some of the pressure to scale physically, and hopefully that will allow the psychedelic companies that are left to be successful. We'll see.
Yeah. It's one of, I've become fairly libertarian in my old age, because the more I see like regulators, the more I see well-intentioned people making stupid decisions. And, I get it. Like the decision to approve MDMA assisted therapy or not needs to be made on the basis of, the specific application. But anyone in their right mind's got to look and be like, okay, we've rejected this application for MDMA assisted therapy. It seems by and large because of the complications that having another qualified professional in the room ensuring a person's safety created in the circumstances. So now we've created an incentive for every other drug development company in the psychedelic space to try and eliminate the fact that you have another qualified professional ensuring a person's safety in the room. It's like, really? This is the smart outcome, is give people incentives to take therapists out of the room so people are doing it with less support and less, like, really? Like someone at the FDA, if anyone at the FDA is listening, it's like, get your head out of your ass. Like, this is remarkably dumb, like remarkably stupid. But this is the consequence that you created. And it's, that's what makes me angry. That's what makes me really, really angry, is that we created this outcome because people couldn't see past, the letter right in front. They couldn't see the forest for the trees. And now everybody on the planet is worse off because 10 people had their head up their ass.
Yeah, that's the way it goes sometimes. And I agree. I guess to end on a hopeful note is hopefully what you just said, that lesson isn't taken to its extreme, and future, providers in the space find a way to like have a middle ground and provide some sort of support, and we're not just selling mushroom pills without any sort of supportive infrastructure. I guess part of these conversations is to guide the next iterations, and your experience and your insight is useful, and I'm happy for it. And we're thinking about doing something on psychedelics and relationship therapy. So who knows? Maybe we'll get you and your wife on the next podcast.
Can we be on MDMA when we do it?
I mean, I'm fine. Fine with me.
Yeah. One of the things, and like, even though I've been relatively pessimistic about the industry overall, one of the things that I see happening more and more, and I know this is a bit of a sidebar conversation, but I think as AI becomes progressively ingrained in our society and so many white collar jobs get replaced by, artificial intelligence, which I do believe is going to happen, the fundamental things that are going to be left to humans as a skill set is going to be peer-to-peer, is supporting each other. And so even though I don't see a scalable psychedelic, therapy company coming, I see a lot of people, doing the work and starting to sit for each other and really becoming a true community around this. And because that's what's going to be left to people, is caring for people, right? That's one thing that AI can't necessarily do the same way humans can do. And so, as it becomes more ubiquitous, as more people get experience with psychedelics, as more people start sitting with other people, it's like, it's a movement that I think is unstoppable. And I think it's going to become more and more ingrained in our society. It's just going to be less professionalized and more community oriented. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. The future asset will be the human side. That's what we will offer. And maybe we'll start to structure things and business opportunities and all of our innovation at a human-centered model.
Yeah,
let's see.
Absolutely. Yeah,
fingers crossed.
I mean, the future is yet to be written, but that's what's one of the fun things, is we get to help write that. So let's get at it.
Yeah. I appreciate maybe a quick comment on anything you're working on, looking forward to. Can end with that.
Yeah. So one of the insights I had fairly early on after we launched the Field Trip app is that, and I touched on this, which is like the psychedelic movement is too serious, right? Like we forget about the fact that taking psychedelic drugs is also a hell of a lot of fun and a really enjoyable experience most of the time. And so one of the projects I'm working on right now, it's not specifically in psychedelics, but is to develop, functional alcohol alternatives, what I'm calling meme brews, because they're mimetic to the effects of other drugs, that are legal, that are safe, that remind us to have fun. A lot of people these days are drinking less. A lot of people in the psychedelic space are drinking less, and for very good reason. Alcohol has its health consequences. Hangovers, especially once you get into your 40s, really suck. But not drinking comes at the cost of fun. There's actually a study that showed that life satisfaction is at its highest when people are moderate alcohol consumers. And on either side of the curve, life satisfaction goes down. So it's like, okay, well, if you're cutting out drinking, I get it, but that actually comes at the cost of life satisfaction. So what can we put in there that's legal, that can give you some of the effects of alcohol that make it so enjoyable? And so that's what I'm working on right now. And I've come up with a few formulations, which I think are effective. I tested one out on a couple of buddies last night and we had a great time. So feeling very excited for that.
No hangover.
No hangover. Everybody slept well. Like that was the key. You sleep well and no hangover and you feel great for a couple of hours.
Send me a sample.
I will, as soon as I can build them in a little bit more scale, because really it's me hand mixing them right now, opening capsules, mixing it up, weighing it. So it's not very scalable, but I'm trying to find some manufacturing partners to take it to the next level.
Once again, Ronan Levy is at the forefront, shaking things up. All right.
I try. Thank you.
All right. Great talking to you. And, I'd love to do it again sometime.
Anytime. Happy to chat.
I really appreciate it, and good luck.
Thanks, Jason.